Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today to discuss the power of goal setting. My name is Desiree Williams, and I serve AKSI as the Digital Education Coordinator, and I will be producing this webcast. Before we get started with the presentation, let's review the web-based features available to you. This webinar will be advanced remotely, but at the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use throughout the program. If you're watching this webinar on a mobile device, you may need to scroll down or over on your screen to see these widgets. Each window on your screen is customizable as well, so feel free to resize and move them to fit your needs. A copy of the slideshow and other additional materials are available in the green Resource List widget on the right. The group chat is a way for you to talk to others watching the program. When posting, it will list your first name and last initial, but please share your chapter and university as well. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget with the question mark icon. And lastly, if you have a question throughout the program, please type that into the Q&A widget. All questions will be discussed at the end of the program with our presenter. Each new year, we get an opportunity to set new goals that often get tossed aside just a few months later. During today's webinar, we'll review how to reflect on your progress and set realistic goals for the future. We'll also outline a goal-setting process that will allow you to hold yourself accountable for the goals that you do set. So now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Mike Johnson. Mike is a career strategist and professional coach who works with those seeking help with career exploration and advancement, as well as mid-career transition or professional rediscovery. He also collaborates with companies focused on talent and leadership development. Mike works with people one-to-one and in groups to develop and empower them professionally and personally. He has empowered clients to develop and implement strategies and plans toward reaching their goals, and he has consulted on best practices for effectively targeting and finding a job. And now I'll hand it off to Mike to get us started.
Thanks, Desiree. Goal setting is something many of us want to do and know we should do. It's a new year, and many of us make New Year's resolutions of areas we want to improve or things we want to do. A colleague of mine has told me, I don't set resolutions, I set intentions. Okay, whatever word we use, a good many of us don't follow through. Let me give an example. Every January I see a surge of new activity in the gym where I work out, and it's harder to find a parking spot. Usually it lasts a few weeks and then it tends to settle back to normal. Why is that? Well, sometimes it's because we know we should, and we should do it, but frankly change is hard, and we can lose our motivation. Let's face it, any number of things can get in the way that cause us to forget about what we said we would do, or we have conflicting priorities to develop. Before we start talking about a process for how to create goals that you will be able to stick to and follow through, let's talk about why it's important to set goals in the first place. Or let's put this another way. A goal is a reality for my life that I want, that is not yet a reality. Let me repeat that. Think about that. A goal is a reality for my life that I want, that is not yet a reality. So ask yourself, what specifically do I want? Name the goal. How deeply or badly do I want it? Now, a goal can be a big one or more nebulous, such as, I want to make better grades, or I want to have a better marriage. Or it can be more focused, such as, I want to buy a house and move in the next year. A goal is ahead of us. It causes us to focus toward and forward, two powerful words. Let's look at those independently. Toward. Sometimes it's easier to think of what we don't want or want to move away from than it is to look ahead. But a goal is in front of us, and we focus our energy in moving toward it. Now, forward. Often we're uncomfortable with change, and we tend to look backward to the past, to the familiar, to the status quo. But a goal is in the future and helps us set our intention to pursue it. Also, a goal is more tangible as something you should or could do. Those words or thoughts can derail you. In fact, a coach of mine once told me those are poison words, could or should. A goal is something you determine you can do and you will do. Okay, so that helps us get a handle on what a goal is about. Plus, setting goals can help evaluate your priorities, can create a roadmap for your success, and hold you accountable. And frankly, the process of setting and tracking and moving toward goals helps us build some other skills, and we'll talk about that later. So before jumping right into creating your goals, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture. You know, one of my favorite quotes is from the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. And some of us adopt that philosophy for our goal setting, don't we? But let's think about what you want. So what do you want? Where do you want to be? At the end of the term? At the end of the year? Maybe at the end of the month or the quarter? Focus on different categories. You know, make it real. Think about goals in terms of different areas of your life, like family, school, faith, relationships. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, too. Utilize foresight and forward thinking. Where do you want or need to focus your time and your energy? Also, think about the principles that guide you. What is important to you? What do you live by? Often a goal will help us move toward those principles. And they might be areas of relevant, moral, accepted standards that guide your behavior and say, okay, I want to be more like that. Often that's a goal. So in addition to considering where you want to be, consider how you want to feel and what you want to be able to do. Most people don't set a goal of going to the gym 4 times a week because they want to go to the gym 4 times a week, but they want to be healthier or feel stronger. The act of going to the gym is just a step in how to get there. Understanding the vision of where you want to be and how you want to feel will be important when you get to the creation of your specific goals. Or to put it another way, what will it look like when you've achieved the goal? Having a vision helps your motivation. So let's look at a couple of examples of vision and goals. Here's an example. I worked with an MBA student who was struggling with motivation about halfway through a degree. Together, we envisioned what it will look like when she walks across the stage to receive her diploma to the sound of applause. She even imagined throwing her cap up in the air. Now, she's a little more reserved, so I'm not sure she is going to do it, but she can envision it and get her head around it. Here's another thought. I can set a goal to shoot an 80 for 18 holes in golf, but if I don't believe it's possible, because I currently shoot 95, is that really viable? So what is viable? And how can I envision a straighter drive, a better putt, and set that vision so I can maintain my momentum toward it? Well, now that we've looked at our vision and where we want to be, how do we create the specific goals we want to reach? So, as a reminder, here's a tip. Avoid shoulds. I should do this, or I should look like that, or I should be more like this. Does the should match what you want to do or feel? So avoid creating goals that you should do but aren't willing to commit to. Remember, I talked about how this is what you can do and will do. And don't create goals based out of fear. So let's now turn our focus toward creating our goals. And that's the next step. List some goals. Start with a small number. Get the hang of this. Start with a half a dozen. For each one you've listed, plan it out. What steps do you need to take to get there? What are a few key milestones along the way to the goal? And what's completion look like? How will you know when you've achieved it? So break it up into smaller chunks, smaller activities or tasks along the way. They might be dependent upon each other, build on one another, smaller time increments, that kind of thing, so that you have a way to allow for progression to occur. One method to use in creating goals is to make sure they are SMART goals. And we mean goals that make sense, that are smart. But SMART is also an acronym, S-M-A-R-T. And we'll look at each of those letters in turn. Let's start with S. S is for specific. Think of the old mantra of journalism in creating and chasing down a story. They asked the W questions. Who is involved? What do you want to accomplish? Where? Identify a location. When? Identify a time frame. Why? Know the specific reasons or benefits for accomplishing the goal. And which? Identify any requirements or constraints. Here are some examples. Get in shape becomes join a health club and work out 3 days a week. Make better grades becomes improve my GPA this term. Now, don't get hung up on having to write all 6 W's for every goal, but use them to help you set some specific goals. M is for measurable. How will you know if you reached your goal? Establish concrete criteria for evaluating progress and completion. Consider how much or how many. Quantify it. Use numbers, percentages. Example, make a 3.8 GPA this term. A is for attainable. Do you have the time, capacity, and financial ability to achieve the goal? Goals must be important to you, not someone else. Don't make a goal based on what your parents think, or even necessarily what your spouse thinks. What's most important to you? It will probably benefit your parents or your spouse, but the key thing is to be attainable for you. Creating goals that are important to you helps you find ways to make them attainable. For our example of better grades, what kind of student have you been? Is a 3.8 attainable for you? R is for realistic. Are you willing and able to complete the goal? Have you accomplished something similar in the past, so you know you're able to do it again? Or you can clearly envision that it's doable? What conditions would have to exist to be able to complete the goal? And for a grades example, how do you need to adjust your study schedule? How much more time during a week? Where do you do your best studying? Do you need a study partner? Figure out the answer to those questions. Finally, T is for timely or time-based. In other words, what is the time frame involved here? Setting a date for a goal quantifies the when from sometime to a target date and helps create a sense of urgency. Now, dates are vital. If you don't use them, you may have an idea, but not a goal. I will save $2,000 is monumentally different than I will have $2,000 in new savings by June 30th or by the end of the year. So, we've looked at SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T. This should give you something to hang your goals on to make them practical. Once we have our goals listed, and they're SMART goals, we've broken those down into key milestones or steps and tasks. Now, that helps us to then track our progress and monitor how we're doing toward those goals. A benefit, it helps keep a momentum and gain a sense of satisfaction when something is done, even a small task or a step along the way. Here's another example of this, looking across areas of life, and maybe this will help you towards setting some goals, is look at life as a wheel of balance, and these things kind of ebb and flow with how big of a pie piece they take where we're at in our season of life. But as an example, I categorize life, because I saw this a while back, in terms of areas of focus: intellectual, physical, spiritual, family and home, ministry or service, financial, career, social, recreational. And that can help you envision goals to each of those areas. And what I do is annually look at what do I want to achieve and what do I want in each of these areas. And I then create some annual goals. And then monthly I look at, okay, what's the next step toward that? How do I get further along the way? And I'm able to see where I'm making progress. And frankly, it helps me keep myself focused versus a year later saying, okay, I said I wanted that and it didn't really happen. Another major part of creating goals is understanding your motivation. This goes back to the beginning of creating a vision. Why are you seeking this change? What is the driving factor? Some aspects of this are, first, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. You're more likely to focus and stick with goals that are intrinsically motivating. That is, it comes from within you, not from a parent, friend, spouse. Secondly, it helps you focus on the long-term benefits. What are the benefits of attaining that goal? And keep those in mind. Third is vision. Remember that vision. What will it look like when you've achieved the goal? Having a vision helps you keep motivated. Remember the vision of attaining the diploma and walking across the stage. Track your progress along the key milestones you've set. Seeing your improvements or setbacks can boost your motivation and keep you on track. Once you've set the goal, what can you do to make sure you reach it? How can you hold yourself accountable? Now, I live in Indiana, where one of our pro team's mottos is, "We grow basketball here." You've probably seen a referee call goaltending. It's where an opposing player blocks a shot on its way into the basket. Rest assured, you will face obstacles and distractions that will get in the way of attaining your goals and block your shot, sometimes even as you near the goal. In basketball, you work on rebounding, engaging your teammates, and getting another shot. Well, in life, you do the same. Here are some practical ways to keep you moving forward toward your goals. So keeping you accountable, let's look at 3 things. First, enlist your own team. Pick someone you know and trust, whom you know will encourage and support you. In basketball analogy that we used, help you rebound and get another shot when you experience setbacks. Tell them about your goal and time frame. Ask for their support and to hold you accountable. They are now your accountability partner. Pick a couple. Don't get frustrated with them if they remind you. They're not a nag. It's what you ask them to do, and keep them in the loop. Secondly, track your progress. Frequent check-ins can help you create new habits. So track your progress toward your goal. Use some sort of visual tool, a picture that represents the vision you thought about earlier when you set the goal, a list of key milestones you can check off visually, even a spreadsheet you can color code if that's your style. And when you reach a milestone, celebrate. It doesn't have to be major. You can grab coffee with your accountability partner. High five, fist bump, you get the idea. You feel good when you've accomplished a step forward, so show it and share it. And when you've attained the goal, of course, celebrate that too. Make the celebration fit with the goal. If it's a major accomplishment, celebrate bigger. I mentioned the grad student I was working with who envisioned walking across the stage and receiving the handshake and giving the diploma, having the robe and the cap on. To be honest, she invited me to her commencement ceremony. I wasn't able to go, but she was so pumped that she sent me some pictures. And, okay, she didn't throw her cap in the air, but her smile would light up any room.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. And before we transition into the Q&A portion, let's go over the key skills that you guys were exposed to today. These may not have come to mind right away as you were watching or listening, but you will naturally build these skills as you progress in your goal setting. Now first, as you look at the major areas of your life to determine where you want to focus your goals, you will enhance your decision-making skills. As you learn how to create SMART goals, you will gain experience with analytical and critical thinking as you develop and evaluate those goals. By frequently reviewing your progress and holding yourself accountable, you will be able to build your organization skills. And lastly, you will gain confidence in your abilities and a sense of accomplishment when you reach those goals. And at this point, we are going to transition to questions with our presenter, Mike. Just a reminder from earlier, you can launch the Q&A widget from the menu dock to submit those questions. If we don't get to your question now during the presentation, we will respond via email, and this feature will remain open and on-demand viewing as well. So our first question, where should I start if I'm not sure where I want to be at the end of the term or the month or the year?
Good question, Desiree. I would say it comes down to internal. And part of this process is envisioning and answering the question. And the toughest question in coasting, frankly, is what do you want? What do you really want? And so good to respond to that specific one. I don't know where I want to be at the end of the state term, right? Well, where do you want to be? What do you want at the end of the term? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Get a sense of that. And then oftentimes just being alone and with a pad of paper and a pen or your laptop if you're a techno person, just think that through and then start writing what comes to mind. That's a good Kickstarter.
All right, we'll go to our second question. How many goals would you say are feasible to focus on at one time?
This is a personal thing, too. It's interesting. There's all sorts of disciplines around this. You may have heard of some research on the notion of multitasking. So I'll comment a bit on that, is if we try to do too many things at once and focus on too many things at once, we tend not to focus all that well on anything specific. And some of the major companies that have open workspace concepts like Google are starting to implement, say, tech-free zones, right? So that, put your phone down, your mobile phone down, concentrate on a task and finish the task. And without getting into a lot of time and motion studies. But so one question is, how many balls am I juggling at once before one drops to the floor if I don't keep them all going? The other side, though, is when we work with people in life goal planning, looking ahead and across, if you remember the wheel diagram, across these different areas of life, it's not uncommon to have 40, 50, or more life goals. As I was preparing for this session, I started looking at how I do my annual planning, which I mentioned earlier, and just counting up my goals for this year, I've got 30 goals. Now, am I doing all those at once? No. It's that notion of saying, what do I want to focus on next? So hopefully that helps.
And the next one's kind of a tough one, because sometimes we can't all meet the goals, especially if there's a lot of them going on at once. So would you say it's okay to abandon a goal, and if so, under what circumstances?
Well, there are various facets to that. So the general answer is, yeah, whose goal is it? Yours. Nobody's externally pushing you to. That's the whole point of our dialogue today, is set your own goals and make your own momentum and track your own progress. That said, we work for an employer, and employers obviously has goals for us, and we integrate those into how we want to approach it. But there are times it's like, let's look at those SMART criteria. We find something's not attainable. Now, sometimes it's to circumstances beyond our control, or sometimes it's because of other priorities that overtake that. Here's a real practical example. We moved into a house about 7 years ago. We changed venues because of where my wife got a new teaching position, and her commute changed and all that. And we have a storage room, which was a storage unit that we'd use from staging the old house to then moving to the new house. And we finally, after, I'm going to tell you how long it was way too long, we said, okay, we just got to let's not pay for the storage unit price. Let's take the stuff and get rid of stuff and then bring the rest to the house. Well, my storage unit became a storage room in the house. So for the last 5 years, the first year I gave myself off, right? But for the last 5, it's been work on restructuring the storage room. I haven't got to it, because there are other far more important things in my life that take precedence. So yeah, look at how the goal is proceeding. If you decide that based on those SMART criteria, maybe I overthought that, maybe I was too aggressive, and so I need to make something more realistic or adjust the goal based on realism, or it may be that something completely eclipsed it and I just have to push it aside, or maybe I work on, as you said, maybe it's okay, maybe I delay that for a quarter or whatever. So yes, it's okay to abandon or to rearrange priorities or to push out the time frame.
All right. And so if you kind of walk through those steps and you know that you aren't going to reach it, or it may be time to kind of push it off till the next round, what are kind of the next steps? What should they do?
I think it's that notion of, do you abandon it to say, okay, this was just unrealistic. I'm just not going to do there. I'm never going to shoot an 80 in golf, right? So, well, do I just reassess the goal and say, what's realistic? Okay, maybe I should strive for an 85. So you either can reset the goal, or, as I said earlier, maybe it's just adjusting a time frame. I got some stuff that encroached on me this quarter. I need to push it out 3 months. Or, let's say I'm not going to make my 3.8 for this term, but I might be able to make a 3.5. and then based on my class load and what I learned from my study haps this term, maybe I next term say, okay, I'm going to re-engage my goal of 3.8 and then change some of my behaviors and work on that along the way.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned accountability partners earlier in the presentation. So who would you say is a good person to have act in that role?
Usually it's somebody who you know and trust. They're not going to just be a yes man or yes woman and just kind of give you a nod. Oh, you're doing fine. Don't worry about it. You're cool. You want somebody who'll speak truth to you, who is knows you well enough that knows if you're saying if you're going to blow it off, right, and they're going to nudge you back. So it's somebody that you've got that kind of connection and relationship with is the best accountability partner. Now, sometimes that builds over time. I'm very active in career search and job search, and I have a group that I meet with every week that changes. We have different people every week, same core people, and then they find jobs and others come take their place, that kind of thing. So the group's dynamics are always changing. But I've noticed that even people that met for the first time, I had two people that had a common ground just 2 days ago, and one of them said, "Hey, I'm data analysis, security analysis, financial analysis." And it says, "Hey, I'm in data modeling, database data modeling." So they live in the same IT world, and I don't think they're going to compete for jobs, but they're looking at the same arena. And the second person, who was her first time there, looked at the first and said, "Can I be your wingman? You said you're going to do this. You okay if I call you on that next week?" Absolutely. So it's that notion of commonality, of connection, and sometimes that spark happens immediately. Sometimes it's people that you have more of established. Usually, it's more of an established relationship.
And so for our viewers today who are just really excited to go set some goals after this conversation, what would you say from everything that we've talked about is kind of the best first step to take?
Come back to the fundamental question: what do you want? What is it you want? And it is interesting as I work with folks across the spectrum, whether it's really short-term goal setting, life goal setting, career goal setting. That's often the hardest question to ask, because do we know ourselves deeply enough to know what we want? But even at a higher level, without going super deep or psychoanalysis or anything like that, just you ask yourself that question, give yourself some time to think. Some of those answers. I guess the second stop there, sorry to interrupt you, but I guess along the way before a second answer to that question is based on the area you're looking at. For example, if you're looking at, well, how do I go about setting a goal for my career, my postgraduate career? I'm going to graduate in 3 months, and what's that going to look like, and how am I going to go? Well, have you talked with your placement office, your career services office? Get a sense of them of some steps along the way. What's realistic? What do you see in the market trends? And for example, it says, well, I'm graduating May 2nd. Pick a date at random, and I want a job by June 1st. Well, if you wait until April to set a goal of having a job by June 1st, I'll just about guarantee you that's going to be tough to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are all the questions we have for our presentation today. Mike, do you have any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you'd like to give out?
Yeah, I'd say in general, it's the hardest step is the first step. So ask that question: what do I really want? What do I want? What do I really want? Start envisioning that, and just practice it. Set a goal or two. I mentioned in the kind of the flow, you pick half a dozen. If you're really struggling with this, set a couple of them. Get somebody who knows you well, says, hey, I'm working on this area. Here's kind of what I envision. I think it's doable. I've kind of applied the litmus test to this. What do you think? You know me pretty well. And so maybe seek somebody or coaching in terms of even setting some goals at first if you need it. If you need a crutch or help, because you have resources, use them, and then just start and look back through the visuals in the process here, and set some goals. Look at the SMART criteria and say, yep, check the litmus test. I've got dates, and just start working. That's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you to our viewers for joining us today, and thank you again, Mike, for taking time to present for us and for that content. If our viewers have any follow-up questions or conversation about the program, please contact education@aksci.org.